a vice presidential visit to Metro Atlanta.
Thank you. Please, it's great to be in Peachtree City.
J.D. Vance takes the president's agenda on the road.
Republicans, as I said, have stopped wanting to solve people's problems.
Former Lieutenant Governor Geoff Duncan goes on the record. The Republican-turned-Democrat reveals what he believes the winning strategy will be in the race for governor. And President Trump vows to change how American elections are run.
We're going to end mail-in voting. It's a fraud.
Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
Vice President J.D. Vance with Georgia on his mind and his travel schedule, hitting the Peach State this past week to boost the administration's so-called Big Beautiful Bill. I'm Rick Fulbaum, and this is On the Record. The VP's visit, a chance to talk up the giant tax and spend law passed over the summer, promising tax cuts for working families and tax incentives for businesses that make their products here in the U.S. Vance also reminding Georgians of how the legislation eliminates taxes on tips and overtime, helping lower-income Americans, he says, hang on to more of their money.
We believe that you ought to keep more of your hard-earned money, and we believe that if you're busting your rear end every single day, the government ought to make it easier for you and not harder for you.
Now, Democrats like U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff criticizing the law and its cuts to social programs like Medicaid and veterans benefits. He says the bill is causing Georgians to lose their health care and forcing hospitals to close, and that the vice president came to Georgia to do, quote, damage control.
To be very blunt, I think it is embarrassing for the vice president to be coming to Georgia to sell a policy that is already resulting in harm to hospitals in the state of Georgia.
Vance's visit doubled as a Republican rally of sorts. All three GOP candidates challenging Georgia Senator Ossoff spoke at the event, as did Republican gubernatorial candidate, current Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. Joining us now, Don Bolia, a veteran Republican consultant and founder of Peachtree Government Relations, and Fal Sabak, a former executive director of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus and an assistant vice president at McGuire Woods Consulting. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for going on the record. We're glad that you're here. And Don, let me start with you. Why was it so important for the vice president to come here to Georgia to promote the so-called Big Beautiful Bill?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be on this great show. I think the format's amazing. But I do think it's important for the president and his team to understand how the midterms are going to affect them. Typically, the party in power does poorer in midterms elections, so I think they're seeing this as one of the elections they have to win in order to retain the Senate. So you're seeing them come out early and come out strong.
So Jon Ossoff took this as an opportunity, as we heard, to really criticize the administration. He says that this is all about damage control. He talked about cuts to social programs. Is this sort of a preview of what we can expect to hear from Senator Ossoff as he wages his first re-election campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you have this massive bill. The polling numbers on it are not great. I think that Senator Ossoff is right to come out to try to poke some more additional holes into it, because I think that they're going to try to sell this to the American people, and the Democrats are going to have to stand up and say we're not buying it. Right.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Senator Ossoff's potential Republican opponents: Mike Collins, Buddy Carter, also Derek Dooley, likely to get into the race here. We're talking about them all trying to get the attention of Republican primary voters at this point. So, Don, as someone who's been around Republican politics for a long time, who do you see emerging as the front runner in this race?
Well, certainly Governor Kemp is going to endorse Derek Dooley for U.S. Senate, and that's going to give him a big bowl. Kemp is the most popular politician in Georgia, hands down. I think that's going to be a major push for him. I think Collins has sort of captured that far right side of the electorate. And if you think about it, in a Republican primary, we're only talking about 1.2 million voters, even though there's 10 million Georgians. So it's a small universe they have to capture.
And so, Fal, we just heard Don mention Governor Kemp, who obviously is very popular and who cannot run for re-election because of term limits here in the state of Georgia. But polls show that if he were to get into this race, it'd be a really tight one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think the Kemp team flirted with it for a while. I think ultimately he ruled it out. I think you'll see most of his power go back to supporting Derek Dooley.
What do you see, though, as a Democrat sort of looking from the outside in for Governor Kemp and his future?
Oh, for his future? I mean, look, if I'm Governor Kemp, I mean, I think the sky is the limit at this point. You're one of the most popular governors probably in the nation. You know, I was a little surprised that he passed on U.S. Senate, to be honest with you. I thought that between him and Ossoff, that was really a 50-50 breakdown of the state. So it would, I'm curious to see what he does in the future.
Don, what do you think are the governor's next steps?
Well, you know, he's the chairman of the Republican Governors Association. That gives a national platform. He is raising millions and millions of dollars all over the country. I think, as Fowle said, he's got a lot of doors open to him. Whatever he wants to do, he can do it, whether it's in the business side or whether it's continuing in politics. He's got a bright future.
Well, another politician making headlines across Georgia right now, Geoff Duncan, the former Republican lieutenant governor of our state, recently announced that he has switched parties. He is now a Democrat, and he says he's even considering a run for governor in 2026. And he went on the record with Atlanta News First political reporter Doug Reardon.
Geoff Duncan, thank you for joining us on the record this week. We appreciate you being in
glad
our
to be
studios. So I want to start with really what's been making headlines quite recently, which is your switch from the Republican to the Democratic Party. What was it that made you want to make that switch?
For folks who've operated around me in politics for a number of years, aren't really surprised by the move. This has kind of been a slow progression over the years. And I can't point to a specific issue or a certain period of time. It's just an overall discontent.
So let's get the hard part out of the way. I am a Republican.
You spoke at the DNC last year. You were up there and you said that your journey to the podium, again, started around the time that Donald Trump became prevalent in GOP politics. Was that really what got you thinking about switching, or did it predate that?
Yeah, I think it predated it. I think two things have really driven it for me. One is watching Donald Trump just completely rip the life and soul out of the Republican Party. They are no longer concerned about solving people's problems. They just simply want to call people names. And then the second part is this batch of solutions, and that's really what's always drawn me to politics, is being part of the solution. Republicans, as I said, have stopped wanting to solve people's problems, and I think the Democrats are ripe for an opportunity to start being the party of ideas, and that's the invitation I needed.
You said up there on stage at the DNC, if Republicans are being honest with ourselves, our party is not civil or conservative, it's chaotic and crazy. If Republicans are being honest with themselves, what can they do to fix the party?
I certainly have tried the full spectrum. I mean, I pushed back on a number of initiatives as lieutenant governor. I pushed back on Donald Trump as vocally as I possibly could. Done all I can do, but Republicans didn't want to get out of their own way.
When you were on stage at the DNC, you also said that Trump shouldn't ever set foot in the Oval Office again. A few months later, that's exactly where he was. He was reelected.
I'm very, very disappointed, but it is what it is. The American people spoke. A majority voted for Donald Trump, and we've got to do the best we can do.
You also testified against him in that grand jury proceeding at this point a couple of years ago.
I went there to deliver the facts about what I knew about fake electors showing up, trying to usurp democracy. I went there to talk about communications that were behind the scenes. I just answered the questions that they gave.
What were those days after the election like for you as second in command in the state?
Yeah, intense is an understatement. When you have state troopers, sitting outside your house 24 hours a day because death threats are coming into me and my wife. They know your kids' names. Yeah, it's intense.
Now that you're part of the Democratic Party, what would you like to see them do to maybe be more aggressive and kind of get back to what this base that they have lost over the course of the last few election cycles really wants?
If this 2026 election for governor is about the fringe issues, I think Democrats lose. I think a majority of Georgians want somebody to focus on job creation, economic development, public school, health, access to health care, solving some of the issues around poverty.
Do you have any plans to stay in politics, to maybe run for a higher office?
We're thinking about it. My wife and I and family are really considering running for governor as a Democrat in 2026. We haven't made any sort of firm decisions.
What are your ideas for some of the biggest problems that are facing Georgians right now?
Every day we have a $17 billion rainy day fund. But I think there's an opportunity to take a portion of that, say 10%, $1.7 billion, and reinvest that in Georgians. Some sort of jumpstart fund. We can start to tackle guns. 90+% of Georgians want to do something about guns, gun safety. Let's do it. Let's not just be scared of our own shadows.
There are huge chasms between the way that Republicans feel about some of these things and the way that Democrats feel about some of these things. Abortion, gun control, LGBTQ issues, now even education issues. How will you convince Democratic voters that you do have the interest of the Democratic policy in mind.
I mean, if you talk about education, school choice matters in certain zip codes, in certain areas. But at the end of the day, an overwhelming majority of kids, like my kids, are educated in public schools. So I think we need to invest in public education. I think we need to look through the lens of what it's like to be one of the 1.2 million people who don't have health insurance. There's issue after issue that I've got a track record of wanting to work on. And I think at the end of the day, I'm going to be honest and authentic. I'm certainly going to be a more moderate individual than probably other folks that are going to run for governor in 2026, if that's a decision that we make.
Well, Geoff Duncan, thanks for going on the record with us. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome.
And you can listen to that full interview right now on the On the Record podcast. Just search for Atlanta News First on your favorite podcast platform. And we're back with Fal Sabak and Don Bolia. And Fal, you've seen Geoff Duncan as a Republican, now as a Democrat. Do you think that he could make any headway if he were to get into the race with Democratic primary voters?
Look, I do think that he has an audience in the Democratic primary. I don't know if it's the majority of the Democratic primary. That's going to be the challenge that he's going to face. He's going to have to answer questions about why certain pieces of legislation passed when he was lieutenant governor at the time. And I think that the Democratic primary voters are going to be asking those questions and looking very hard at that.
Don, as a Republican, would you have any concerns if Geoff Duncan were to get into the race? Because, here's someone who could attract moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats as well, independent voters. What do you think?
Quite frankly, if I was a Republican nominee for governor, I would want him to be the Democrat nominee. He's potentially actually one of their weakest candidates. He doesn't really have the ability to excite the base. As Fal mentioned, specifically, you can talk about his support for the heartbeat bill, which he's trying to walk back. It's really hard to walk back a bill when you're at the bill signing and glad handing and at those moments.
Well, coming up next, how would you like to not have to pay any income taxes? A Republican candidate has a plan to abolish Georgia's income tax. Could it happen? And what would it mean for your financial future? Also, President Trump wants to do away with mail-in ballots, but does he even have the power to ban them? We'll talk to an expert from Kennesaw State University next. Happening now, President Donald Trump wants to get rid of all mail-in ballots for voters across the country. He made that pledge on social media even as voting by mail has become very popular. According to the Georgia Secretary of State's website, more than 280,000 mail ballots were cast in 2024. That's about 5% of the total votes cast. During COVID in 2020, mail ballots made up more than a quarter of all ballots. The president also wants to eliminate voting machines, which are used in virtually all elections. Joining us now is Kennesaw State University political science professor and Atlanta News First political analyst, Dr. Ben Taylor. Professor, good to see you. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we're talking about seniors, college students, military personnel. Okay. These are the people that use mail-in ballots. Why would President Trump want to do away with that practice?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Rick. I'm very happy to be here. But the reason President Trump is so antagonistic about mail-in ballots is because he has now for 4 years insisted that he lost the 2020 election because of what he calls fraudulent mail-in ballots in 2020. There have been, I want to emphasize that, and that there is no evidence that there was any fraud in 2020. And there were more than 60 court cases brought where former President Trump at the time, and now President Trump, and aligned groups could demonstrate evidence of this supposed fraud, and they were unable to generate any evidence at all. So that's where his antagonism comes from, which is unfortunate because, as you point out, it's a very effective way for people to vote. It's a method of what we call convenience voting, and Georgia has been a real leader in absentee ballots over the last 20 years.
Now, the president says that he can do away with this by simply declaring an executive order. Can he do that?
No. The short answer is no. Executive orders are effectively directives to the bureaucracy about how to implement existing federal law. And the fact of the matter is that the federal government doesn't really have a role to play in the actual administration of elections. But to the extent the federal government has any say over elections at all, it can only be done through congressional action. So if President Trump wanted to have the Congress get involved, they could make some differences in federal voting laws that way.
I want to just go back to that point because it's an important one, and it's one that Democrats are making around the country, that the executive branch, the president, doesn't have control over elections around the country. It is the state that runs those elections.
Exactly right. And it is true that Democrats have been saying this quite loudly of late because of all the discussion about perhaps an executive order. But the Republican Secretary of State of Alabama, who is a very conservative, very pro-Trump Republican, said, no, 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 this is a state responsibility. So this is a well understood area of constitutional law. The Constitution explicitly gives the role of administering elections to the states.
So there are mail-in ballots, and then there are voting machines, which President Trump also wants to do away with.
Yeah.
These are machines that are used in virtually every election. They too came under attack in 2020, although there was never any evidence that was presented that there was any fraud as a result of these machines. But how would that even work?
Well, again, it's unclear that the federal government has any role to play in this. The federal government generally makes election laws that deal with equitable access, right? Making sure everyone has access to ballots in their language and things like that. So getting rid of specific types of machines or forcing everyone to go to paper ballots, that's extremely unclear that that's something the federal government could do.
All right, so Georgia election leaders are voiding hundreds of thousands of voter registrations, and this is a part of Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger's efforts to clean up, he says, our state's voter rolls. Last month, more than 400,000 voters who were marked inactive since November of 2022 were sent notices in the mail. They were given 40 days to respond and to confirm their registration. So, Professor, who are these so-called inactive voters? And what happens if somebody gets one of these notices in the mail, maybe doesn't see it, and then shows up at the polls to vote and is told that they can't?
That's a great question. So, the first thing to know is that inactive voters are voters who have not participated in at least 2 election cycles. And then the people who have been removed or who would have been notified they were inactive and then were removed, they have not been active in at least 4 election cycles. So election cycles are 2 years long. And that means that if you are a voter who has been removed from the voting rolls, you have not voted in 8 years effectively. And so the Secretary of State's office would have sent a letter or something in the mail where you could have responded to them and told them, no, I am still an active voter, I want to go vote. And they would keep you on the rolls, but otherwise you would be removed. And anyone can check this at any time. If you go to the Secretary of State's website, you go to My Voter page, you can put your name in, your address, and it populates. You can find out who your elected representatives are, where your precinct is, and if you are an active or inactive voter. And then if you're not registered, if you've discovered that you've been removed, you can re-register right there on that website.
And you can check it, as the professor says, right now online. In fact, we've made it easy for you. Just scan the code right there on your screen to download the free Atlanta News First app. And we've got a link to the Secretary of State's website right there. Coming up next, a major shakeup in the Georgia Secretary of State's office. Are we about to see a new candidate jump into one of our big races ahead of 2026? On the record, and right now, some Georgia lawmakers are working to eliminate the state income tax. A bipartisan committee met for the first time last week to consider new legislation. If passed, it would create a $16 billion revenue shortfall that could be offset by removing tax incentives for businesses. Some states that have done away with the income tax have been forced to raise property taxes and sales taxes to make up the difference. The committee will meet several times before giving its recommendations sometime in December. Also, Gabe Sterling is leaving his position as Chief Operating Officer of the Georgia Secretary of State's office. The Republican has served as COO for more than 6 years, and he got national attention for famously warning President Donald Trump in 2020 to tone down his stolen election rhetoric. Don, I'm hearing that Sterling is leaving the Secretary of State's office to run for higher office. He won't answer my call, so I don't really know at this point. But what are you hearing, and what kind of crossover appeal might he have? Because here's another Republican who is still, I'm guessing, considering himself a Republican, but who might have the support of some moderate conservative Democrats and independents.
Absolutely. So I think we're all presuming he's going to be looking at running for Secretary of State. I think he's waiting to see what his boss, Brad Raffensperger, does. And you're right. You know, the 2020 election provided him with a huge boost in name ID. There's probably very few people in the entire state that would have name ID as high as Gabe Sterling. So I think he's got a wonderful chance to win that if he chooses.
He has a lot of fans on the left for having stood up to President Trump back in 2020. Do you think, Fal, that he could parlay that into a successful political career?
He might be able to in the general. I'm curious to see if he can make it out of the Republican primary. Exactly to the factor that you just mentioned, to standing up to President Trump. And so on the Democratic side, I think in the general, he will have some people on the left who will say, oh, we like him. He stood up to the president. But I would be curious to see how he would match up against a strong Democratic candidate for Secretary of State. I think that the Democrats would rather choose a Democrat.
All right. Gabe Sterling, answer my calls, please. Atlanta News First is digging into all the latest news from elected leaders across Georgia and our nation's capital all week long. Subscribe to the weekly On the Record podcast to get political updates right in the palm of your hand. And that's our show for this week. Thanks to Don Bolia and Fal Sabak for going on the record with us. We'll see you next Sunday.